Hey everyone. For the last couple months, we've been looking at one component of love, and that component in particular was compassion. If you've been keeping up as we've been doing these teachings on Monday nights and then small groups, we've been looking at compassion in particular. Today we're going to pivot a little bit. We're going to shift our focus from that component of love to another component of love. And so before we dive in, I just want to say it's been really cool seeing a handful of you. I've seen you, whether it was at the outdoor church service yesterday or at Saturdays in the park. It's been really cool being able to see you in person. And hopefully soon we will be able to gather as a youth group again in person. That day is approaching very, very quickly. I want to know where you want to get together. So what I want you to do when you watch this video, text me and say which park you think we should meet at, because we're probably going to be meeting outside. So give me ideas. Shoot me a text, say, hey, this is the park that I think we should meet at. Looking forward to hearing your ideas. Without further ado, let's begin. So to start this, we are going to open our Bibles to the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 14, verses 7 through 11. We're going to join Jesus at a dinner. So let's read. Luke chapter 14, verse 7. It says, "Now he told a parable to those who were invited, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." So in the ancient Near East, where this takes place, there was what's called a honor and shame culture. And so basically anything that happens there throughout the day, you have the opportunity to accumulate shame or accumulate honor. Obviously, gaining honor is better than gaining shame. So this passage we just read can be a little confusing. So let's break it down. Imagine you are at an event like a wedding, and you have a good seat. You have a seat of what we'll call honor. How would you feel in that moment? I know for me, sitting in an honorable seat, that would feel pretty good. Like that's where we want to be. We want to be in a better seat. We want to have honor. We feel good when we are ahead of other people. Now, on the flip side, some of you may actually say, well, I'd be embarrassed to be in front of other people like that and to be called out and in front of everybody as like, oh, this is the person of honor. What about if you were in the opposite seat? What if you were in a bad seat? How would you feel? I know how I would feel. Angry, frustrated, jealous of people who are in better positions than you. Then Jesus makes his comment, right? About how you should humble yourself and God will exalt you. If you exalt yourself, then God will humble you. This isn't Jesus' event, right? Like he didn't plan this party, as we can tell. Like he wasn't the wedding planner. He didn't throw the party. He didn't provide the food. And so it's interesting because Jesus doesn't seem to be respecting their privacy in this moment. And respecting privacy is a really big deal here in America. Like, hey, just let them do what they want to do and you'll do what you'll want to do. Jesus is not respecting their privacy. He's just going straight for, hey, there's something wrong with how this is working right now. You are sitting in an honorable seat and you're putting other people in a bad seat. In fact, you should be switching. You should be sitting in a bad seat. You should be giving other people better seats. And this is really strange because think about how that would look. Jesus shows up to a party. It's not his. He's just a guest. And he looks at the other guests showing up and being like, hey, you guys are motivated by pride. You all are just trying to make yourself look the best, right? That is quite bold of Jesus to say. So I have a question for you. Do you think what Jesus is doing is right? Or do you think maybe Jesus is being intrusive on people's private lives? And I want you to think about that for a second. Do you think what Jesus is doing here is right? And I know our typical, growing up in a church, our immediate go-to answer to that question is, of course, what Jesus is doing is right. He always does what's right. But I really want you to think about this. I really want you to hear this question and consider, do I really agree with what Jesus did? Or does it sort of rub me the wrong way? So we see Jesus is intruding a situation in order to accomplish something good. He's speaking fearlessly into them. But if your response to my question was, I don't know if I agree with what Jesus did, I want you to know that's okay here. It's okay to wrestle with this. Sometimes when we first learn something that Jesus did, or we learn a truth about Jesus or something that God asks us to do, our first response isn't always, oh, I totally get it. Sometimes we have questions. Sometimes we are looking at things, and I want you to know, I know I've said this before, but I want you to know 222 here at NAPC, the youth ministry here at NAPC, is a safe space for you to ask questions. It's a safe space for you to wrestle with the truths of God and of Jesus, and of the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, the triune God that we worship. And if there's things that you don't get, there's things that bother you, I want you to know you can talk to me, you can talk to the other leaders, you can talk to your parents about those things. And we're here to help you. We're here to walk with you through those struggles. So let's get back to the story. If you were to sum up verses 7 through 11, basically with just a couple words, how would you do it? How I would do it is I would say, if you're motivated by pride, if you're motivated by looking the best and doing the best, then eventually God's gonna bring you low. Eventually you're gonna get knocked down a peg or two, right? Do you think that principle would change our world? I mean, think about it. So many people are going after and striving after making themselves look the best. They are their motivation. Imagine if pride and making themselves look the best and getting the best for themselves wasn't people's motivation. What kind of different world would we live in? So then after Jesus has this, I mean, we can say it's kind of an awkward interaction where he tells a bunch of guests where they should be trying to sit at a wedding. He then, right after the verse 11, he has another exchange. It says in verse 12, he said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So now not only has Jesus looked at a bunch of guests and said, hey, you're sitting in the wrong seats, he has now looked at the person who's hosting the wedding and said, you invited the wrong people. He's criticizing now the guest list. In our culture, that feels odd. Like I couldn't imagine going up to someone being like, hey, I don't think you invited the right people to your own wedding. But Jesus, again, he's making a point, and we have to think, this isn't our culture. This is a culture that everything is about honor and shame. And everyone was going after honor because everyone's motivated by pride. They want to have the best seat. They want everyone to see them in a good light. They want everyone to know how great they are. What Jesus is implying here is that just because you're kind to people, just because you're nice to certain people, it doesn't mean that you're a fully loving person. Love demonstrates itself fully when you do something for someone that cannot repay you, that cannot give it back to you. The ultimate example of this, of course, is Jesus. We think about the cross, right? Where he gave us something that we cannot repay back to him. No matter how hard we try, no matter how much we strive, we can't pay him back for what he did for us on the cross. That's what love looks like, is doing something for someone that and truly not expecting anything in return. What Jesus is demonstrating here is incredible honesty. He was willing to look at people and say, hey, you're motivated by pride. You're motivated by acceptance. And the kind of honesty that Jesus shows here is rare, right? We don't want to be honest in this way because we are afraid that people will reject us. We're afraid that people won't love us or see us in the high way that we want them to see us. They won't honor us in the way we want and think we deserve to be honored. So I want you to combine this honesty that Jesus shows here with what we looked at for the last couple months, compassion. It's usually pretty rare to find someone so full of compassion like Jesus was, be so honest like Jesus is here. And why is that? Well, normally because when we think of a compassionate person like that, they're normally not trying to hurt people's feelings. They're not saying things out of line, out of turn. And so sometimes they tend to be like mild-mannered and they don't want to say anything that stirs the pot, right? But if someone's known for being brutally honest, they're typically less on the compassion scale, right? I know for me, I typically bend towards the honest side in a lot of ways. And sometimes I can forget about the compassion side, but Jesus balances them both perfectly. He is fully compassionate and he's fully honest all at the same time. And so Jesus shows us that there's a way that we can be both to people because that's what people need. That's why Jesus gives both. That's why Jesus is both. I wonder which one you lean towards. Is it honesty or is it compassion? And as we recognize that, we can begin to pray and ask God to help strengthen the other one, not weaken one, not be like, Lord, I'm always honest. Help me be compassionate and less honest. No, and it's not if you're compassionate, maybe lower my compassion so that way my honesty can rise. No, how can we join them together and both of them grow and be compassionate and honest towards people? I want to flip to another passage real quick. It's in John chapter 5, verse 41 and 42 and 44. Jesus says, I do not receive glory from people, but I know that you do not have the love of God within you. And 44 says, how can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? Jesus says he's not, the opinion of people is not his concern. The opinion of God is his concern. And that's pretty much always so opposite of our concern, right? I am so concerned about what people think of me. I want them to see me a certain way. And Jesus says that's not having a heart of God, the heart of God. And so how can we have the heart of God? Well, we can care about people the way Jesus cares about them. Not in a way that we are shackled or under their control or we're worried about what they think, but we care about them. And then we're willing to be honest with them and speak with them and tell them the truth. Because Jesus tells us the truth. He's not concerned if we're going to be like, oh, no, now I don't like you, Jesus. No, it's good to be honest and full of compassion with people. So how can we do that? Well, one, let's admit that we struggle with this and ask God for forgiveness. Ask God to forgive us for being less honest than we should be and less compassionate than we should be towards others. And then how can we grow in this? Well, the first thing we can do is we can pray. And we can ask God, one, for mercy, and two, for grace, to help us in this way, to help us become more like him in this way, because what he did for us, how compassionate he is and how honest he is with us is amazing. And we see these facets of love coming together and blessing us in a way that just one without the other would not. Far too often we're afraid to speak the truth. Far too often we're afraid to tell people what Jesus would want us to. A lot of that then boils down to where we can be afraid to share the gospel for a lot of reasons. And one of the things we have to tell people when we share the gospel with them is that they're sinners who are in need of Jesus. And to tell someone they're a sinner and that there's someone in need, that's hard. But if we're trying to honor God, if we're hungry to please God, then we'll be willing to risk things. We'll be willing to say things and go out on a limb, and we'll find a way to say things that in a way that builds people up, not tears people down. We don't want to just say, oh, well, I'm just super honest and blunt. No, we want to find a way that can build people up. I look forward to diving into this more deeply with you in small groups. Have a good week.